Davison. I'm head of practice for Weber Shandwick Finance here in Dubai. So I run the financial services and professional services practice here. Right. Well, Claritas is a framework that we developed basically to help us understand crisis. We do a lot of crisis work here, and in my background through many years of PR, have done a lot of crisis work. And what we started to do probably over a year or so ago is look at how we were approaching crisis. And everyone's familiar with the three phases. You prepare, you respond, and you recover. That has been in place for decades, and that works, and that's a very good methodology to look at crisis. But we felt there was more going on, and we felt that we could get deeper into understanding crisis and helping our clients understand crisis. And so we started doing research. Some of the crisis work that we did desktop research and really looked into the crisis team, really looked very, very deeply into what was happening during the crisis. And what we did was we came up with 4 what we call dynamics. And these 4 dynamics are, the first one is the crisis landscape. And if you think of it as a diagram where a crisis will emerge, it will build, come up, peak, and come back down. That's kind of a curve that you generally see. And so this is what we call the crisis landscape. The other thing that goes on with crisis is response. And if you've experienced a crisis, you know that response is very important. If it's a big crisis, there are different types of people, different parties involved in the response. So the response interaction is very, very important to consider when looking at a crisis. So this is the second dynamic. The third dynamic is what we call target audiences and stakeholders. And usually when you think of a crisis, you think of someone with a mic in the face of a spokesperson, the spokesperson saying whatever about the issue. And that's a very superficial view. There's a lot going on in terms of how you respond. There are people recovering from the crisis. There are people speaking to different stakeholders. And so understanding how that dynamic interacts is very, very important. And then the final dynamic that we identified was the sensitivities. Who are your stakeholders? What are they concerned about? How do they get their information? What actually are they caring about? And how, in light of your varied stakeholders, how you speak with one voice. So you have crisis landscape, response interaction, you have target audiences and stakeholders, and sensitivities. So an acronym is Claritas, which means in Latin, it means clarity. So by understanding these 4 dynamics, you actually get a clear window into crisis and what's going on. Yeah, very good question, because if you work in crisis a lot and you work with a CEO who's in charge of what's going on, he's got 4 basic questions. What's going on? Who's fixing it? What's happening? What are we saying? And who are we talking to? Right? Those 4 questions actually map very closely to Claritas. The landscape will show you what's going on. The response interaction shows you how we're responding. The target audience and stakeholders will say who we're talking to and when. And the sensitivities analysis is what are we saying. And so basically, and we realized this as we were going through developing this framework, that these are answering the 4 fundamentals of what's happening in a crisis. And so what this tool does is when we onboard a client in crisis communications, we're able to explain to the entire organization how it's approached, what it is we're doing, who's talking and why, and the importance of this whole framework. And see, it's much more, again, going back to the prepare, respond, recover, that isn't robust enough to really give you a good idea about what's going on or what happens during a crisis. So what it does is it gets the entire organization on the same page, which during a crisis is extremely important. If you look at the landscape and the build, the crisis will emerge somewhere, whether it's on social media, the newspaper, journalist calls, you have a consumer complaint. It can come in different areas, and it can come at different levels. You know, if a plane goes down, everybody knows about it immediately. Or it could be a slow burn crisis. And what the trick is you want to minimize this. So you need to know how it's going to build. And interestingly enough, a lot of people tend to over-communicate in a crisis because you know more than the outside world does. And so you don't want to push the crisis up the escalation phase. And so knowing where you are on that curve really helps in terms of directing your communications, how it should be handled, who you talk to, the timing of things. And it's a very, very, very powerful tool that has helped a lot of our clients actually save a lot of resources, time and energy, and bottom line money. It works well because fundamentally it simplifies an extremely complex situation. And if you think about it, in each one of these four dynamics are present in every type of crisis, whether it be a product recall, a hacking incident, an airline industry disaster, a manufacturing problem, even a reputational issue. Each one of these are relevant in different ways. And so when we take a scenario-based approach to crisis planning, which I'm sure many consultants do. But how do you fit all these diverse scenarios into a unified framework? Well, it's by using these four dynamics, these frameworks. And so it's much easier. It helps you get your mind around something that's very, very complex. When you're responding to a crisis, the one thing you don't have is time. And you've got to think very deeply and very quickly about certain aspects of what you're doing. The trick about crisis preparation is you want to take all of the things that you can think out of beforehand and get them out of the way, map it out and lay it out so your thinking time can be focused on the immediate needs of the unique situation you're in. What Claritas does is it really gets down into explaining things, what's going to happen, who we're talking to, who the relationships are with, when you talk to these people, how you do it. All of these things that if you don't consider beforehand, you're running around in the middle of a crisis, wasting your time doing something that could have actually been prepared for earlier. Again, with crisis, effective resolution. The first rule of crisis management is to protect life, property, reputation, these type of things. And so to be able to come out of the crisis with those intact is very important. One characteristic of this crisis is that people know about it. If people didn't know about it, would it actually be considered a crisis or just an issue? But so you can never get away with no one knows about this. But the one thing about good crisis management is it's fundamentally very sophisticated communications. If done in the right way, it can actually enhance reputation. The way an organization responds to a crisis says a lot about the organization, says a lot about their ethics, their principles. And so a well-managed crisis can be beneficial. I'm not sure if you want to say that, but it can in the end strengthen your reputation and your company. The efficiency that it gives, and also the fact that claritas, meaning clarity, it gives the entire organization clarity in terms of what is going on. There's understanding of who is doing what, why, when, and that's a very valuable thing when things start heating up around a crisis. But it gives confidence to senior management, to boards. We've presented this to boards, and actually to the people that are actually responding. And so everyone is confident enough in what they're doing because they planned it out, they know where the pieces of the puzzle fit, and they can go do their job confident that it will all be okay. We'll get through this.